I found out my kids were waiting for me to die by accident. Not because I was sick, not because anyone had warned them, but because I walked past the study and heard them talking about my estate like it was already theirs. My daughter Rachel was going over numbers, trust accounts, property values. My son Mark said, if it happens this year, the transfer will be cleaner, less tax. He sounded calm, organized, like he was planning a closing date, not losing a mother. I stood there in the hallway of the house I paid for, listening to them discuss timelines for a future where I wasn't an obstacle anymore. No one lowered their voice. No one thought I might still be alive and standing 10 feet away. An hour earlier, I'd signed a check for the country club and booked our family trip for summer. And that's when it landed. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about my timing. In their world, I wasn't a person anymore. I was an estate waiting to open.
Welcome to Life Voices, where family drama turns into late-life justice. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.
I didn't walk into the study. I didn't slam a door or ask what they meant. I just went back to the kitchen and stood there for a minute like nothing had happened. The coffee machine was still on. Rachel had left her cup on the counter, half full, lipstick on the rim. Mark was laughing about something in the other room, normal sounds. That was the part that felt the strangest. Nothing about their voices sounded cruel, just practical, organized, like I was a project they were managing. This wasn't some small family house either. This was the house I bought after my husband died. 6 bedrooms, paid in full. The kind of place they liked to show off to their friends. The kind of place they told people was the family home. Funny how that works when the family home still has the original owner living in it. I started noticing things I'd brushed off before. Conversations that stopped when I walked in. Rachel asking me if I'd thought about simplifying my accounts. Mark offering to help organize my paperwork. At the time it sounded helpful. Now it sounded like preparation, like they'd already drawn a line between my life and what came after it. That afternoon we all sat down at the table for lunch. Same table where I'd heard them talking. Mark asked if I'd renewed the insurance on the house. Rachel asked if I'd updated my will recently. Casual questions. Too casual. The kind you ask when you think you're being subtle. I answered normally. I've had years of practice at staying calm in rooms where people underestimate me. Rachel smiled that tight smile she uses when she's trying to sound caring. We just want to make sure everything is easy for you, she said. Easy for me. Right. Mark leaned back in his chair like this was a business meeting. You've worked hard your whole life, he said. You shouldn't have to deal with complicated stuff anymore. Complicated stuff. That's what they called my life, my money, my house. Everything I built after their father died. Everything I kept running while they were busy building their own lives. They weren't being loud or aggressive. That would have been easier. They were calm, reasonable, polite. That's what made it feel cold, like I'd already been moved into a different category, not the center of the family anymore, just the person who needed to get things in order. I noticed Rachel had a folder with her, a slim leather one she carries to meetings. She didn't open it, but she kept her hand on it like she was waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to say something that would let her slide it across the table. I didn't ask. I didn't give her the moment. We talked about the weather, about Ethan's school, about a trip they wanted to take next fall. Plans that didn't include me, but somehow depended on me. They kept saying things like, once everything's settled and after we get the paperwork sorted. They didn't say what paperwork. They didn't have to. I'd already heard enough. At one point, Mark said, "You shouldn't worry about managing all this alone." I almost laughed. I've been managing it alone for 20 years. The investments, the properties, the accounts, the decisions. Alone never seemed to bother them when the results were comfortable. Rachel reached across the table and touched my hand. Light. Careful. We're just thinking ahead, she said. That's what families do. That line sat there between us. Thinking ahead. not asking what I wanted, not asking how I felt, just assuming the timeline, assuming the outcome, assuming I'd eventually sign whatever they put in front of me because it would be easier. I looked around that dining room, the chandelier I picked out, the artwork I bought, the view of the garden I pay to maintain. Everything in that room existed because I made it happen. And somehow, in their minds, I'd already moved out of the picture. Not physically, but emotionally, financially, logistically. They didn't hate me. That's the strange part. There was no anger in their voices, no resentment, just replacement. Like I'd already been phased out and they were stepping into roles they thought were waiting for them. After lunch, Rachel cleared the plates. Mark checked his phone. Normal, calm, ordinary. If someone walked in, they'd see a perfectly pleasant family afternoon. No raised voices, no drama, just a mother and her grown children talking about the future. Only the future they were talking about didn't include me in it. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed for a while. The house was quiet, too quiet. I kept replaying what I'd heard in the hallway, the way they'd talked about timing, about transfers, about making things easier once everything was in their name, not if, once. That's when it really settled in. They didn't want me gone out of cruelty. They wanted me gone out of convenience. And somehow, that felt colder than anger. A few days passed and no one brought up the will again. Not directly. That almost made it worse. Everything stayed polite, controlled. Like we were all pretending the same thing. Rachel kept coming by with little suggestions. You should really think about consolidating accounts. Mark offered to review some paperwork for me. They spoke in that careful tone people use when they think they're being helpful, but they're really circling something. I started paying attention to details. Rachel checking my mail stack before handing it to me. Mark asking if I'd already spoken to my attorney this year. Questions that sounded casual but landed heavy. They weren't curious. They were tracking, like they needed to know where everything stood. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet. I went downstairs to make coffee and realized Mark's car was already in the driveway. That wasn't normal. He usually came later in the day. I heard voices in the kitchen before I even stepped in. Low voices, focused. I stopped in the hallway without thinking, not trying to spy, just listening because the tone felt different. Rachel was at the table with her laptop open. Mark had a stack of papers in front of him, real papers this time. Not hypothetical, not vague. Rachel said, if she signs before summer, the transfer is cleaner. Otherwise, we're stuck waiting. Mark answered, she'll sign. She doesn't want things to be complicated. Rachel laughed a little. Not mean, just confident. She doesn't even know half of what she has. We just need to keep it simple. That last line hit harder than the rest, not because it was loud, because it was calm, like a fact, like I was already someone who needed managing. I stayed in the hallway longer than I should have, long enough to hear Rachel say, once the house is in the trust, we can list it right away. The market's good. Mark replied, yeah, we'll move fast when the time comes. When the time comes. Not if. When. I walked into the kitchen then, slowly, on purpose. They both looked up at the same time. For a split second, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel closed her laptop a little too quickly. Oh, you're up early, she said. Bright voice. Practiced. Mark smiled like nothing was happening. Morning, Mom. I poured my coffee, sat down, acted normal. Years of hosting dinners and business meetings taught me how to sit in a room and not show what I'm thinking. I asked about Ethan, about work, about traffic, normal questions. They answered normally, like the last 2 minutes hadn't happened. Rachel moved the stack of papers slightly to the side, not away, just enough to look casual. We were just going over some things, she said. Nothing important. Nothing important. Papers about my house, my accounts, my life. Nothing important. I nodded, took a sip of coffee, let the silence sit. Mark started talking about a vacation they wanted to plan next year. Rachel asked if I'd thought about downsizing at some point. Not now, of course, just someday. Always someday. Always framed as a suggestion. But I'd already heard enough. I realized something sitting there at that table. They weren't waiting for me to die out of desperation. They were planning because they were sure it was inevitable. Like I was a timeline they just needed to manage. No urgency, no fear, just scheduling. That's what made it worse than a fight. If they'd yelled, I could have yelled back. If they'd been cruel, I could have called it out. But this was calm, organized, reasonable. The kind of behavior that looks responsible from the outside. The kind people praise. Adult children helping their mother get things in order. Except I hadn't asked for help, and I wasn't confused, and I wasn't leaving anytime soon. After they left that morning, I stayed at the table for a long time. The coffee went cold. I kept looking at the spot where Rachel's laptop had been, at the stack of papers she thought I hadn't noticed. I thought about all the years I'd kept things running, paid for schools, paid for weddings, helped with down payments, made sure they never had to worry about the kind of things I worried about when I was their age. And now they were sitting in my kitchen, planning how to move everything into their names when the time comes. That's when the truth finally settled in. Not a suspicion, not a feeling, a fact. They weren't just talking. They already had a plan. The shift came a few days later. Not loud, not dramatic, just a different tone. Like they'd decided it was time to stop circling and start moving. Mark called and asked if he could come by with Rachel. Said they wanted to go over a few things. I knew what that meant before they even walked in. They showed up with that same calm energy. Smiles, coffee, polite voices. Rachel had the leather folder again. This time she didn't hide it. We sat at the dining table. My table. The one I'd heard them planning around. Mark started with small talk. Work, traffic, the weather. Then he leaned forward and folded his hands like this was a meeting. "Mom, we've been thinking," he said. "You've got a lot on your plate. It might be time to simplify things." Simplify. That word again. Rachel slid the folder toward me, not fully across the table, just into the space between us. Inside were papers, neatly organized, tabs, notes, prepared. They hadn't thrown this together overnight. This was something they'd been working on. "It's just a power of attorney," Rachel said lightly. "Nothing scary, just in case, so we can handle things if you ever need help." If I ever need help. Not if I want help, if I need it. Mark nodded like this was obvious. "We're not saying anything's wrong. We just want everything to be easy when the time comes." When the time comes. There it was again. Always the same phrase. Calm. Certain. Like they'd already decided on the timeline and were just waiting for me to cooperate. I flipped through the papers slowly. Not because I didn't understand them, because I wanted them to feel the time passing. Rachel watched my face carefully. Mark kept talking. "You don't want strangers handling your accounts," he said. "Or the house. It's better if we take care of it. Keep it in the family." Keep it in the family? As if I wasn't the family sitting right there. Rachel leaned forward slightly. "It's just practical. Everyone does this. It protects you. It protects us. It keeps things smooth." Smooth. That's what they wanted. A smooth transfer. No surprises, no delays, no complications. Me included. I asked one question. Calm, neutral. "What happens if I don't sign?" They exchanged a quick look. Small, fast, but I saw it. Mark answered first. "Why wouldn't you?" Rachel added softer. "We're just trying to make this easier for everyone." Everyone. Not me. Everyone. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it, not pushing it away, not pulling it closer, just leaving it there. The air in the room shifted. Slightly tighter. They were waiting for me to agree. Waiting for the moment where I'd say yes so they could relax. "Things can get messy if this isn't handled early," Mark said. You know how families are. I almost smiled at that. I know exactly how families are. Rachel's voice got a little firmer, still polite, still careful. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly, but close enough. A reminder that resisting would make things uncomfortable. For them, for me, for everyone. They weren't yelling. They weren't being cruel. That's what made it feel like pressure instead of a fight, like a slow push toward a decision they'd already made for me. I thought about the years behind us, the support, the money, the stability, all the times I stepped in when they needed something. And now they were sitting across from me, acting like my role was already wrapping up. Like I just needed to sign a few things and make the transition smooth. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them of anything. I just sat there and let the silence stretch a little longer than they were comfortable with. Mark cleared his throat. "We're not trying to take anything from you," he said. Rachel added quickly, "Of course not. This is all still yours. Still mine. For now." I slid the folder back toward Rachel, slowly. "I'll think about it," I said. Not yes, not no. Just enough to keep the room calm, enough to keep them from pushing harder in that moment. They both nodded like that was reasonable, like they weren't expecting an answer today anyway, like they had time, like they were confident the outcome would eventually go their way. We finished the conversation politely, too politely. They stayed for coffee, talked about normal things, weekend plans, Ethan's school, traffic again. The kind of conversation you have when everyone's pretending nothing serious just happened. When they left, the house went quiet again. I stood in the doorway for a minute after they drove off. Same house, same driveway, same life. But something had shifted. It wasn't just that they were planning ahead. It was that they expected me to cooperate. They weren't asking. They were preparing. After that meeting, I stopped explaining myself. I didn't bring up the folder. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I just got quiet, not cold, not angry, just neutral, calm in a way that made everything slower around me. Rachel texted the next morning. "Did you have a chance to look over the documents?" I replied, "I'm thinking about it." No extra words, no emojis, nothing to grab onto. Mark called that evening. "Hey, just checking in. You doing okay?" "I'm fine." "Did you talk to your attorney yet?" "Not yet." Silence on his end. He waited for me to fill it. I didn't. Before, I would have explained. I would have reassured them. I would have softened everything. That's how it always worked. I kept things smooth. I made everyone comfortable. This time I didn't. Days passed. I went about my life like usual, paid bills, met friends for lunch, went to the club, booked a trip for myself in the spring. Small things, normal things. But I stopped sharing details, stopped volunteering information, stopped looping them into every plan like I used to. Rachel noticed first. She came by one afternoon with that same careful smile, sat at the kitchen island and watched me make tea like she was waiting for a cue. "You've been quiet," she said. "Have I?" "Yeah, just distant." Distant. Interesting word. I've been living in this house for years, running everything, keeping everything stable. Now a few days of not over-explaining myself felt like distance to them. "I've just been busy," I said. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Her eyes moved around the kitchen like she was searching for something out of place, something that would tell her what I was doing. "You know we're just trying to help," she said again. "I know. You're not upset, right?" I said I'm thinking about it. That answer hung there. Not emotional, not reactive, just flat. She wasn't used to that. Usually I'd fill the space. Usually I'd reassure. This time I let the silence sit. She stayed for another 10 minutes talking about random things. Work, Ethan, a neighbor. None of it landed. She left earlier than usual, slightly tense. Slightly unsure. Mark started calling more, not aggressively, just checking in, asking if I needed anything, asking if I'd made any decisions, asking if I'd scheduled an appointment with my attorney. Every time I kept my answers short. I'm fine. I'm handling it. I'll let you know. No extra detail, no timeline, no reassurance. The change in their tone was subtle at first, then less subtle. Rachel started texting more often. Little questions that didn't matter. Did you renew the insurance yet? Did the accountant send the report? Things she never cared about before. Not really. Now she cared about every detail. Mark showed up one evening without calling. Just dropped by. Said he was in the area. He wasn't in the area. He sat in the living room and looked around like he was trying to read the room. You seem different, he said. How? I don't know. Just quieter. I shrugged. Everything's under control, I said. That's when I saw it. The shift, the unease, the way he leaned back slightly like he was trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. Before, they counted on my reactions, my explanations, my emotions. Now there was nothing to measure. I didn't confront them. I didn't accuse them. I didn't bring up the hallway conversation or the kitchen table or the papers. I just stopped playing the role they were used to, and that made them nervous. Rachel started using a softer tone. We just want to make sure everything's okay. Mark said, you can talk to us. Talk to them. About what? The timeline they'd already built in their heads? One night, Rachel asked directly, you're not planning anything without telling us, right? That question told me everything. Not because of what she said, because of what she was afraid of. They didn't care if I was upset. They cared if I was making moves they couldn't see. I looked at her and said, I'm handling my affairs. That was it. No extra detail, no reassurance. She nodded, but her jaw tightened slightly. She wasn't used to not knowing. They both weren't. They'd been so calm before, so certain. Now the calm was slipping. That's when it hit me. They weren't afraid of me saying no. They were afraid of me saying nothing. Silence left them with no control, no timeline, no guarantees. They couldn't plan around a blank space. They couldn't manage a decision that hadn't been shared with them. And for the first time since I'd heard that conversation in the hallway, I felt steady, not angry, not vindictive, just clear. I didn't need to fight them. I just needed to stop explaining myself. A week later, I called my attorney and asked for an appointment. Not urgent, just quiet. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell Rachel. I just scheduled it for a Tuesday morning like any other errand. Miss Harper has handled my accounts for years. She knows every property, every investment, every little detail I've built over time. When I walked into her office, she didn't ask what was wrong right away. She just poured coffee and waited. People like her know when to let someone speak first. I need to make some updates, I said. She nodded. No surprise, no reaction. Just opened a folder and waited. I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. I just explained that I wanted everything clearer, more controlled, less automatic. She understood exactly what that meant without me spelling it out. We went through everything slowly: the house, the accounts, the trust, who has access, who doesn't, what happens immediately, what happens later, what happens if someone tries to move too quickly. I asked a lot of questions, not emotional ones, practical ones. What happens if I want to delay distribution? What happens if I want conditions? What happens if I want everything handled through a third party? Ms. Harper answered each one calmly. No judgment, no surprise. She's seen families like this before, more than I probably realize. At one point, she looked up and said, "Do you want this to be obvious or quiet?" That question sat in the room for a second. Quiet, I said. So we made it quiet. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would alert anyone right away. Just adjustments. Structures, safeguards, new instructions, new timing. Nothing illegal, nothing extreme. Just controlled, thought out. Mine. When I left her office, nothing looked different on the outside. Same car, same house, same routine. But something had shifted. Not in a loud way, just in a way that felt settled. Rachel called that afternoon. "Hey, just checking in," she said. Casual voice. Too casual. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "You sound busy." "I've got a few things to handle." Pause on the line. "You didn't go see anyone about the documents yet, did you?" she asked lightly. "I'm taking care of things," I said. That answer wasn't enough for her. I could hear it in the way she stayed quiet for a second longer than usual. "We just don't want anything getting complicated," she said. Complicated. That word again. Always about keeping things simple for them. "I understand," I said. And that was it. No details, no timeline, nothing she could use. Mark came by that weekend, unannounced again. Walked through the house like he was checking something without admitting it. Sat down in the living room, looked around, looked at me. "You've been handling a lot lately," he said. "I always have." "Yeah, but if you need help, we're here." Help? They kept offering help. But what they really wanted was access, visibility, control. "I'm good," I said. "Everything's under control." He nodded, but he didn't relax. He asked a few more questions. Casual ones. About the accountant, about the insurance, about whether I'd spoken to Ms. Harper recently. Each question sounded light. None of them were. "I'm reviewing things," I said. That answer did something. I could see it in his face. Not panic, not anger, just uncertainty. They weren't used to not knowing where things stood. Before, I told them everything. Every plan, every update, every decision. Now there was a wall. Not aggressive, just quiet. Rachel started texting more after that. "Let me know if you need anything. Don't forget to send the documents when you're ready." Just trying to stay organized. Organized. That's what they called it. Staying organized. Staying ahead. Staying prepared. I kept my responses short. "Will do. Thanks. I've got it." No explanations. No reassurance. Nothing to hold on to. Inside, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clear in a way I hadn't been before. For years, I'd assumed we were all on the same side. That family meant trust by default. Now I understood something different. Trust isn't automatic. It's earned. And sometimes it's withdrawn quietly. A few days later, Rachel asked directly if we could review everything together. She said it like it was a normal step, like families always sit down and go over estate plans as a group. "I'm not ready to discuss details yet," I said. That was the first time I'd said something firm without sounding emotional. Just a boundary. Simple. Calm. She didn't push back right away. She just said, "Okay." But her voice was tighter, less confident. They were waiting for information, waiting for a timeline, waiting for reassurance that things were moving in the direction they expected. I didn't give it to them, because for the first time, I wasn't planning around their expectations. I was planning around mine. The shift didn't happen all at once. It showed up in small ways first. Rachel stopped sounding confident. Mark started asking the same questions in different ways, like he was trying to catch a detail I might slip. They weren't loud about it. They were careful. Too careful. One evening, they both came over together. No warning, just showed up around 6 like it was a normal visit. Rachel had that same folder again, but she didn't open it. Mark poured himself water and stood in the kitchen like he was waiting for me to start the conversation. I didn't. We sat at the table. The same table where all of this had started. No one spoke for a minute. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It happens when everyone's waiting for someone else to make the first move. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, we should probably go over everything soon," he said. "Everything?" I asked. "You know, accounts, the house. Just so we're all on the same page." Same page. Interesting phrase, as if we'd ever been reading the same book. Rachel leaned forward slightly. We just don't want any surprises, she said. It's better if we understand the structure now instead of later. Now instead of later. Later being the moment they'd been planning for, the moment they assumed would come on their timeline. I took a sip of water and set the glass down slowly. No rush, no tension, just calm. Everything is handled, I said. That answer landed heavier than I expected, not because it was dramatic, because it was final. Rachel's eyes shifted. Handled how? She asked. I've made arrangements, I said. Mark sat back in his chair, not angry, just alert. What kind of arrangements? He asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just kept my tone steady. The kind that don't require a group discussion, I said. Silence. Thick this time. Rachel looked at Mark. Mark looked at me. They were trying to read between words that weren't there. We thought we were going to do this together, Rachel said finally. I didn't realize it was a group project, I said. That line hung there. Not sharp, just clear. Mark rubbed his hands together like he was trying to stay calm. We're not trying to take anything from you, he said. I know, I answered. We just want to make sure things are fair, Rachel added quickly. Fair. Another interesting word. Fair for who? I've spent a lot of time making sure everything is exactly how I want it, I said. It's organized, it's clear, and it's staying that way. Rachel's voice softened. Why wouldn't you trust us with it? She asked. There it was. Not an accusation, not exactly. More like confusion. Like they couldn't understand why the plan in their heads wasn't matching reality. I looked at her for a second before answering. This isn't about trust, I said. It's about control, and my life isn't a timeline you need to manage. That was the first moment either of them looked genuinely unsettled. Not angry, not defensive, just unsure. Mark tried to reset the tone. We can fix this, he said. If something's off, we can adjust. There's no reason to make permanent decisions right now. Fix this. Adjust. Undo. That's what they wanted. A chance to steer things back into the direction they'd expected. I'm not fixing anything, I said calmly. Nothing's broken. Rachel sat back in her chair. Her hands were folded tight. We didn't mean for you to feel pushed, she said. I don't feel pushed, I answered. I feel clear. That word stopped the conversation more than anything else. Clear. No anger, no tears, no accusations, just clarity. There's not much you can argue with when someone's calm and certain. Mark stood up and walked to the window like he needed a second to think. So, that's it? He asked. That's it, I said. No dramatic ending, no shouting, no big reveal. Just a quiet understanding settling over the room. The plan they'd been building in their heads wasn't happening the way they expected. And there wasn't a way to talk me out of it because I wasn't reacting emotionally. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't asking for their approval. Rachel gathered her folder slowly. She didn't open it. She didn't need to anymore. Whatever she'd brought in there was already irrelevant. They stayed for a few more minutes. Polite, controlled, careful with their words. Then they left. No slammed doors, no final arguments. Just the sound of the front door closing and the quiet of the house settling back into place. I stood in the hallway for a moment after they were gone. Same house, same walls, same life. But something was different. Not louder, not bigger. Just settled. They hadn't asked why I was hurt. They hadn't asked what I needed. They'd asked how to change the outcome. And that told me everything I needed to know. After that night, nothing exploded. No dramatic calls, no apologies, just distance. Polite texts, careful visits, the kind people make when they realize the situation isn't going to bend back their way. I didn't change the documents. I didn't reopen the conversation. Everything stayed exactly how I'd said it. Not out of revenge, out of clarity. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't managing their expectations. I was protecting my peace. They still show up sometimes: birthdays, holidays, short visits. We talk about normal things: weather, travel, Ethan's school. We don't talk about the future the way they used to. That part is quiet now. They weren't waiting for my death, they were waiting for control. And once I understood that, the decision became simple. The inheritance didn't change them. It showed me who they already were. So I stopped negotiating my place in their plans and chose my own peace instead.
Your voice matters here. Share your story below. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Have you ever lived through something similar? Share in the comments. Your voice matters here.